Welcome to Malifaux University. 302. Deployment Zones, Strategy, and Schemes. Now that you've established how big a game you both want to play and distributed the terrain in ways you both like, it's time to figure out what you're going to play. Each encounter in Malifaux has a strategy and schemes. The strategy is a large goal that is public knowledge. Both players work to score points in the strategy while denying points to their opponents. There are 5 schemes randomly determined for each encounter. Each player secretly chooses 2 of these schemes and works to score points privately until the schemes are revealed later. Keep in mind that everything you need to get started playing is in the core rulebook. In the forums and other places online, you'll hear players talking about certain schemes and strategies that are not in the core rulebook. These are tournament scenarios found in the Gaining Grounds rulebook. These are often variations of the scenarios in the core rulebook, but with a more competitive edge. When you're first starting out, stick to the core rulebook until you're comfortable with what it provides. To get started, both players shuffle their decks in front of each other. Remember to let your opponent cut your deck. Each player then flips the top card. If there's a tie, both players reflip. If a player flips a joker, that player reflips. When it's done, the player with the higher value card is the attacker and the other is the defender. This usually won't affect the first turn of the game, but there are some decisions to be made before the game starts, and this is how it works. If any game effect references a player with initiative, that's the attacker until the game starts in turn 1. The suit of the defender's card determines the deployment type for the playing area. There are 4. No matter which deployment type is used, the attacker gets to pick a deployment zone first. The defender's deployment zone is the one opposite whatever the attacker picks. If the defender's card is a ram, the encounter will use standard deployment. The attacker picks a table edge and draws a line 8 inches out from that edge. That is her deployment zone, and the defender's is the area 8 inches out from the opposite table edge. The center line runs across the board evenly between the 2 deployment zones. If the defender's card is a crow, the encounter will use corner deployment. The attacker picks a corner and draws a 12-inch arc from that corner. The defender's deployment zone is the 12-inch arc radiating from the opposite corner. The center line runs diagonally between the 2 neutral corners. If the defender's card is a mask, the encounter will use wedge deployment. The attacker picks a table edge and draws a point 12 inches in from the center of that table edge. That is the peak of a triangle sweeping back to each corner of that table edge. The defender has an identical area on the opposite table edge. The center line runs evenly between the 2 deployment zones. If the defender's card is a tome, the encounter will use flank deployment, which many players find the most challenging to mark on the playing area. The attacker picks a corner, and the defender gets the opposite corner. The center line runs diagonally between the 2 neutral corners. You can think of each deployment zone as either a 9-inch thick L or as an 18-inch square with a 9-inch corner missing. This is another time when communication is essential between the players. Once the deployment zone is determined, you may discover that the terrain you both placed throws the game balance off significantly. You might have impassable buildings blocking off most of your zone, or perhaps you have a hazardous terrain feature right in the middle of it. If they feel it's necessary, both players should adjust the placement of terrain slightly to accommodate the deployment zones, or you should embrace the suck and play through. This is part of the privilege and challenge of being the attacker and choosing which deployment zone is yours and which is your opponent's. You should mark the edges of your deployment zone and the center line somehow. Colored dice, little pieces of tape, or even small coins can help identify where the borders are without disrupting gameplay. Now that the deployment zones are determined and marked, go back to the original flip. The suit of the attacker determines what strategy you'll play. Each core strategy is explained in the 500 series of videos, but if the attacker's card is a ram, you'll use turf war. If it's a tome, you'll use plant explosives. A mask means corrupted idols, and a crow means reckoning. Each of these is described in full in the core rulebook. You can discard the cards used in that flip. The attacker now flips 5 more cards. If she flips any jokers or cards with matching values, Reflip until 5 different values are flipped. These 5 numbers determine which 5 schemes go into the scheme pool. Out of the 5 schemes, each player will secretly pick just 2. Each player should read the rules in each scheme carefully to decide how she wants to try to score points. You don't have to pick them right now. You'll build your crew with these schemes in mind if you have enough models to explore options. While it is not required for you to write them down once you pick them, you are not allowed to change your mind and try to score on different schemes later in the game. You should secretly write them down, if only for accountability purposes. Any player who doesn't write them down is probably trying to cheat. Like strategies, each scheme is explained in the 500 series of videos and the core rulebook. 1 is detonate charges, 2 is breakthrough, 3 is harness the ley line, 4 is search the ruins, 5 is dig their graves, 6 is hold up their forces, 7 is take prisoner, 8 is power ritual, 9 is outflank, 10 is assassinate, 11 is deliver a message, 12 is claim jump, and 13 is vendetta. I'll take a brief moment now to thank all those who were patrons at the time this video was made, especially Griff, Sergey, Tom, Alan, Jeremy, Mikolai, and Travis, and many more at the free student tier. Your support is essential to bringing these videos to life. Of course, now that you know each step involved in setting up a game, you can take the shortcut and let the Malifaux Crew Builder app do all this work for you. Here's how it works. Click on Games from the Start menu. Tap the plus sign in the bottom corner. If your opponent has already created the game, you have 2 options for importing that game. We'll address those later. If you're creating the game, tap New. You'll see the setup builder already populated. By default, the app selects the Gaining Grounds rules and scenarios. Tap the 3 dots to the right and select Core Rule Set. The app will immediately change the strategy and schemes to those found in the core rulebook. You can change the name of the game to anything you want. The app will save every game you play until you delete them, so it may help to give your game a unique name. Tapping the name of every feature selected by the app will pull up the explanation for it. Tapping the deployment type will show the diagram for it. If you find that you randomly get the same deployment zones or strategy a lot, you can change anything the app selected by tapping the dots to the right of that feature and selecting something else. This is also handy when you and your opponent want to try a specific deployment strategy or scheme. You could also tell the app to randomly reflip the whole thing by clicking the reflip icon in the top right corner. Once you and your opponent agree on this setup, select Save Setup. If the app crashes or freezes, as any app will from time to time, this will make it easy to get back into the game. If your opponent is also using the app, you'll need to share this game with her. This is where you have 2 options based on your local conditions. If you're both on Wi-Fi or a cellular network, tap Create Game and then select Network. This will create a lobby for your game with your username to the left. Tap Generate Match Code at the top. This will create a set of 3 or 4 symbols. Tell or show these to your opponent. Your opponent will select Games from the Start menu, and then from the plus sign in the bottom corner, select Join. Your opponent selects the same icons as your match code, and you are both now in a common game. This is the preferred way to play because any changes or updates either player makes are shared with the opponent. Track your damage, conditions, and victory points in your app, and your opponent gets those updates as well. If you are not in a location with Wi-Fi, you may wish to click the Share icon in the top right corner of the Setup Builder and select QR Code. The app will display a QR code with the game setup embedded in it. For your opponent to use this, she'll need to open up her app and select Games from the Start menu. In the top right corner is a QR code symbol. Tapping that will activate the app's built-in QR code reader. You may have to turn up the brightness of your screen to get it to work, but she should be able to scan the QR code from your app to import the game settings you just established. The third option is for your opponent to simply create the identical game manually. If you're not using the network option, your games will not synchronize or update in each other's apps. You'll need to communicate clearly which models have taken damage and activated, and how many points you each have scored. However you create the game, the next screen will ask you to import your crew list and select schemes, but that's the subject of another video. That's the overview of generating deployment zones, strategies, and schemes. Pick up a printable set of all the markers and tokens you need to play Malifaux in the Wargame Vault. If you haven't already, join our Patreon for early, ad-free access to all new content, and be sure to visit the Malifaux University gift shop for the latest in Malifaux-themed shirts, hoodies, drinkware, and more. Links are in the notes below. And remember, play friendly games, keep it simple, and have fun.